I remember the first time I laid eyes on Clara. It was at a friend's party, and she was the center of attention, her laughter cutting through the noise like a melody. She had a way of lighting up a room, and I was drawn to her charisma. We hit it off immediately, and before long, we were inseparable. Our relationship blossomed into a beautiful marriage that lasted nearly a decade. We built a life together filled with dreams, aspirations, and a shared vision of the future. I loved her deeply, and I thought that love was enough to weather any storm. Clara was ambitious, driven by a fierce desire to succeed in her career as a marketing executive. I admired her dedication and often found myself supporting her through long nights of work and stressful deadlines. She was on the rise, and I was proud to be her husband, standing beside her as she climbed the corporate ladder. But as the months passed, I began to notice subtle changes in her. She was often distracted, her laughter, once so abundant, seemed forced. I brushed it off, attributing it to the pressures of work. But then came the late nights, ones that were too frequent to be just about business. My gut twisted with unease, but I wanted to trust her. After all, she was my wife, and I had always believed in her integrity. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a text message that everything changed. I was cleaning up around the house when I found her phone lying on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message from a coworker, someone I recognized from her office. "Can't wait to see you tonight, just us." My heart sank. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the implications of those words settled in. The betrayal was palpable, and it took all I had not to smash the phone against the wall. In that moment, I was flooded with conflicting emotions: betrayal, anger, and a profound sadness that felt like a weight on my chest. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but part of me hesitated. I needed to know for sure. I started watching her more closely, piecing together the clues that had been right in front of me all along. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she would smile at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. Each piece of evidence added to the growing storm inside me. When I finally confronted her, the truth spilled out like a dark, heavy fog. She had been having an affair with her coworker, someone I had trusted to be professional and respectful. The words cut deep, and I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. The shock of it all clouded my judgment, and I felt a cold resolve begin to take shape within me. I had always believed in justice, in the idea that actions have consequences. Clara had made her choice, and I realized then that I had to make mine. I would not let her get away with this. I would ensure that she faced the repercussions of her actions, not just in our marriage but in her career as well. The thought of it sent a thrill of adrenaline through me, a twisted sense of empowerment amidst the devastation. The night of our confrontation, as I lay awake in bed, I thought about what I could do. I imagined her struggling at work, facing the fallout from her decisions. It felt wrong, but it also felt necessary. Clara had taken something precious from me, and I was going to take something from her in return. As I stared at the ceiling, I knew this was just the beginning. I was ready to set my plan into motion. The days following my confrontation with Clara felt like an endless loop of tension and heartbreak. I sat across the dining table from her, the silence thick enough to cut. She tried to reach for my hand, but I recoiled as if her touch burned me. I couldn't stand the sight of her, the woman I once adored now transformed into a stranger who had shattered my trust. The betrayal lingered in the air between us, like a ghost that refused to leave. I spent those initial days in a fog, replaying the moments leading up to my discovery. I was consumed by images of her with him, laughing and sharing secrets I would never know. I needed to know more: who he was, how long it had been going on, and why she chose him over me. I turned into a detective. In my own life, scouring her social media, asking around discreetly, and piecing together the timeline of her infidelity. It was during one of these late-night sleuthing sessions that I found out his name, Mark, a name that was now etched in my mind like a brand. A colleague of hers, a man I had seen at company events, always smooth and polished. I remember clenching my fists, envisioning every smug smile he had flashed my way, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. I learned that Clara had been spending more and more time at work, often collaborating with Mark on projects that required late nights and weekend meetings. I felt a surge of rage as I imagined them sharing stolen moments, their laughter echoing in empty hallways while I waited at home, alone. It wasn't just the affair that stung. It was the realization that I was the last to know, the fool who had trusted her completely. After days of grappling with my emotions, I finally decided to confront her again. I needed to hear her admit her wrongdoing, to see the remorse in her eyes. I wanted her to understand the gravity of what she had done. That evening I found her on the couch, her face buried in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a moment I felt a flicker of compassion, but it was quickly extinguished by my anger. "Clara," I said, my voice steady but cold, "I need you to tell me everything. I want to know how long this has been going on." She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "It was just a mistake, a moment of weakness," she stammered, but I could see the guilt etched on her face. "It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything," I scoffed, my voice rising. "You think that just because you say it didn't mean anything, it makes it true? You betrayed me, Clara. You chose him over us." Her sobs grew louder, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. Part of her wanted to defend her actions, to explain away the affair, while another part seemed to recognize the damage she had done. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. Sorry felt like a band-aid on a deep wound, and I was not ready to accept it. I needed to take action. The idea of revenge had taken root in my mind, feeding off my anger and hurt. I had to make her understand that her choices had consequences. If she thought she could betray me and continue climbing the corporate ladder without repercussions, she was sorely mistaken. The next day, I took a calculated step. I reached out to a friend of mine who worked in HR at Clara's company. I needed to ensure that her actions were documented, that there would be a paper trail. I explained the situation without revealing too much of my personal feelings. I wanted to keep it professional, to make it seem like a legitimate concern. "Clara has been acting strangely at work, and I'm worried about her performance," I said, my voice steady, masking the storm within me. "I think it's affecting her ability to do her job well." My friend listened intently, and I could hear the wheels turning in his mind. "I'll keep an eye out," he said, and I felt a rush of satisfaction. This was just the beginning. I had plans to ensure that Clara would face the consequences of her actions, that she would struggle in the very area she once thrived. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. I was stepping into territory that felt foreign, and I questioned my motives for a fleeting moment. Was I really doing this for justice, or was it pure revenge? I pushed the doubts aside, focusing instead on the clarity of my path. Clara had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. I would take away the one thing that mattered most to her, the career she had worked so hard to build. The thought of her facing the fallout filled me with a dark sense of satisfaction, a way to regain control over my life that had spiraled out of my grasp. As the days turned into weeks, the intensity of my emotions oscillated between anger and resolve. I had made the decision to act, and there was no turning back. Clara had crossed a line, and I felt an overwhelming need to ensure she faced the consequences. I began to outline a plan that would not only demote her, but also shatter her confidence in the workplace. I spent hours thinking about the best way to execute my plan. I wanted to ensure that it looked legitimate, that it wouldn't come back to haunt me. I didn't want to be seen as the vindictive husband. I wanted my actions to appear justified, even necessary. I started gathering evidence of Clara's declining work performance. I noted her missed deadlines, her lack of focus during meetings, and her increasingly strained relationships with colleagues. I made sure to document everything meticulously, reinforcing my narrative that she was becoming a liability to the company. The more I gathered, the more emboldened I felt. This was not just about revenge, it was about justice. Clara had betrayed not only our marriage but also the trust of her employer. I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that I was helping her see the error of her ways. I imagined her sitting in her office, surrounded by her colleagues, feeling the weight of her choices bearing down on her. The thought sent a thrill through me, a sense of power that I had lost when she chose to betray me. I also began to think about Mark, the man who had become the source of my pain. I didn't know him well, but I was determined that he would not remain unscathed by this either. I wanted to expose the affair, to ensure that he faced the fallout along with Clara. I started digging into his background, looking for any dirt I could find. I discovered that he had a reputation for being a flirt, a man who had crossed lines before. I knew that if I could present this information to HR, it would strengthen my case against Clara. With each passing day, I felt more like a puppet master, pulling the strings of their fate. I reached out to my friend in HR once more, casually mentioning my concerns about Mark's conduct. "I've heard some things about him that might be alarming," I said, letting the insinuation hang in the air. "It might be worth looking into." My friend was intrigued, and I could hear the gears turning in his mind. I felt a rush of satisfaction knowing that I was setting the stage for my revenge. I wanted to ensure that both Clara and Mark would feel the consequences of their actions, that they would be forced face what they had done both professionally and personally. As I plotted my course of action, I couldn't help but reflect on the moral implications of my decision. Was I becoming the villain in this story? I thought about the love I once felt for Clara, the memories we had shared, and the dreams we had built together. It felt like a lifetime ago. But every time I thought of her with Mark, of the betrayal she had committed, the anger returned, burning brighter than before. I knew I had to stay focused. This was about more than just revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. I could not allow her to walk away unscathed. If I didn't act, I would be left with the knowledge that she had gotten away with her infidelity, and that was unbearable. I needed to feel like I had some control over my life again. The day finally came when I felt ready to execute my plan. I had compiled enough evidence to present to HR, and I was confident that they would take my concerns seriously. I made an appointment with my friend, preparing myself for the confrontation that would change Clara's career trajectory. My heart raced as I walked into the HR office, the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders. I presented my case methodically, laying out all the evidence I had gathered. My friend listened intently, taking notes and nodding as I spoke. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he processed everything I was saying. "This is serious," he finally said, his tone shifting. "We can't let this go unchecked." I felt a surge of triumph at his words. Clara's career was hanging in the balance, and I was the one holding the scales of justice. I imagined her face when she found out that her world was crumbling around her, the realization that her choices had led her to this moment. I could almost taste the satisfaction it would bring. As I left the HR office, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. I was stepping into a dark place, and I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But as I recalled the pain she had caused me, the betrayal that had shattered my trust, I pushed those doubts aside. I was committed to my course of action, and there was no turning back now. The fallout was swift and brutal. It felt as if the ground beneath Clara's feet had been pulled away, leaving her to plummet into an abyss of uncertainty. I had expected a degree of chaos, but witnessing it unfold was an entirely different experience. I had orchestrated her professional demise, and now I was forced to watch as she struggled to cope with the consequences. It began with a meeting that Clara had been summoned to at work. I could only imagine the anxiety that gripped her as she walked into that room, her heart racing. I pictured her sitting across from HR, her palms sweaty and her mind racing with questions. Did she suspect I was behind it all? Did she feel the weight of her choices crashing down on her? I had no way of knowing, but the thought of her discomfort brought me a twisted sense of satisfaction. The next few days were filled with tension in our home. Clara came home each evening, her face pale and drawn, her eyes sunken from lack of sleep. She had always been a vibrant woman, full of life and ambition. Now, she seemed like a shadow of her former self. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me relished the sight of her struggle, while another part of me felt a nagging guilt. Was this truly justice, or was I becoming the very monster I had despised? As the days turned into weeks, Clara's situation worsened. She was demoted, her responsibilities stripped away, and the whispers in the office grew louder. I overheard snippets of conversations among her friends and colleagues, their voices tinged with sympathy and concern. "I can't believe this happened to her," one colleague said. "She was always so dedicated." Another chimed in, "It's such a shame. She was on track for a promotion." Each comment felt like a dagger to my heart. I had wanted to ensure she faced the fallout, but I hadn't anticipated the emotional toll it would take on me. I began to question whether I had crossed a line. Was I justified in my actions, or had I allowed my desire for revenge to consume me? Clara's mental health deteriorated. She became withdrawn, often retreating to her room for hours. I could hear her muffled sobs through the walls, and each cry felt like a reminder of the pain I had inflicted. I had taken away her confidence, her sense of self-worth, and I could see the toll it was taking on her. It was a harsh reality, one that forced me to confront the darker aspects of my motivations. Then came the day when Clara broke. I was sitting in the living room, lost in thought, when she walked in, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked defeated, and for the first time I felt a pang of sympathy for her. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm losing everything." In that moment I had a choice to make. I could have chosen to comfort her, to offer support, or even to confess what I had done. But the anger surged back, fueled by the memories of her betrayal. "You brought this on yourself, Clara," I said coldly. "You chose to betray me. This is the consequence of your actions." Her face crumpled, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. "I made a mistake, I know that," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I never thought it would come to this. I didn't think you would go this far." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt a wave of anger wash over me again, mingled with guilt. I had become the architect of her downfall, and yet here she was, reminding me of the love we had once shared. "You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with someone else," I shot back, my voice rising. "You don't get to play the victim now." The argument escalated, and I could feel the walls closing in around us. Clara's pain was palpable, and I was torn between my desire for revenge and the remnants of the love I still felt for her. I wanted to lash out, to make her feel the pain I had endured, but I also wanted to reach out and pull her back from the edge. That night we went to bed in silence, the tension between us thick enough to cut. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversation in my mind. I had wanted to make her pay, to ensure. She faced the consequences of her actions, but at what cost? I was losing the woman I had once loved, and in my quest for revenge, I was also losing a part of myself. The following days were filled with uncertainty. Clara withdrew further, and I felt the distance between us grow. The love we had shared was now overshadowed by resentment and betrayal. I could see her struggling to reclaim her footing, but the whispers and judgment from her colleagues weighed heavily on her. Each day, she returned home a little more defeated, a little more broken. As I watched her grapple with the fallout of my actions, I began to question the path I had chosen. Had I truly gotten my revenge, or had I merely succeeded in destroying the woman I once loved? The lines between right and wrong blurred, and I was left grappling with the consequences of my own choices. As I sat in the dim light of our living room, I felt the weight of my actions pressing down on me like a heavy fog. The initial thrill of revenge had faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of regret. I had orchestrated Clara's downfall. And now, as I watched her struggle, I was left with a hollow victory. The woman I had once loved was fading away before my eyes, and I was the architect of her despair. Clara had become a shell of her former self. She spent most of her days in a daze, moving through life like a ghost. The vibrant woman who once filled our home with laughter was now a distant memory. I could see the toll my actions had taken on her mental health. She no longer found joy in the things she used to love. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a haunting sadness that left me feeling both powerful and powerless. I found myself reflecting on the nature of love and betrayal. I had wanted to make her pay for her infidelity, to ensure she faced the consequences of her actions. But as I watched her struggle, I began to question whether I had crossed a line. Was I justified in my actions, or had I allowed my desire for revenge to consume me? The line between justice and vengeance had blurred, and I was left grappling with the morality of my choices. There were moments when I felt a flicker of compassion for Clara, moments when I remembered the love we had shared. I thought about the late-night talks, the dreams we had built together, and the life we had envisioned. But those memories were overshadowed by the betrayal I had endured. I couldn't shake the anger that simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of the pain she had caused me. I began to wonder if I was becoming the villain in this story. I had set out to reclaim my power, to ensure that Clara faced the consequences of her choices, but in doing so, I had lost sight of the person I used to be. I had become consumed by rage, and the darkness that had taken root within me was suffocating. I was no longer just a wronged husband seeking justice. I was a man on a path of destruction, and I was dragging Clara down with me. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I heard Clara's soft sobs coming from our bedroom. It pierced through the silence, and I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt wash over me. I had wanted her to feel pain, but I hadn't anticipated the depth of her suffering. I had hoped for justice, but I had only succeeded in inflicting more hurt. The thought of her crying alone in the dark made my heart ache. I had always believed that love could conquer all, but now I was faced with the reality that love could also destroy. I remembered the vows we had taken, the promises we had made to each other. In my quest for revenge, I had broken those vows in a different way. I had betrayed the essence of our relationship, turning it into a battleground of pain and resentment. As the days passed, I found myself questioning whether I could ever forgive Clara for her infidelity. But more importantly, I began to wonder if I could forgive myself for the actions I had taken. I was haunted by the image of her face, the pain I had caused, and the love that had withered under the weight of betrayal. The thought of losing her entirely filled me with dread, a fear that gripped my heart and refused to let go. I wanted to believe that there was still a chance for us, that we could rebuild what had been broken, but the road ahead seemed daunting, filled with obstacles that felt insurmountable. I had to confront my own demons, to reconcile the anger that had driven me to such extremes. I realized that if there was any hope for reconciliation, I would need to take a step back and examine my motivations. I began to think about the possibility of forgiveness, not just for Clara, but for myself as well. I had to let go of the anger that had consumed me, to find a way to heal from the wounds we had inflicted on each other. It wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to try. I knew that if I wanted to salvage any semblance of our marriage, I would have to confront my own actions and the pain they had caused. As I lay in bed that night, I resolved to approach Clara with honesty. I wanted to share my feelings, to express the turmoil I had been experiencing. I needed to let her know that while I had sought revenge, I was also grappling with the realization that we were both victims of our choices. It was time to confront the truth, to face the reality of our situation, and to see if there was a way to rebuild the shattered remnants of our relationship. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to take the first step. I would reach out to Clara, and together, we would navigate the difficult terrain of forgiveness and healing. It was a daunting task, but I knew it was the only way forward. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow in our bedroom. I lay awake, heart heavy with anticipation and dread as I prepared to confront the reality of our situation. I knew that today was a turning point. It was time to face Clara and share the tumult of emotions that had consumed me since my plan for revenge had unfolded. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. When I finally found the courage to speak to her, I found Clara sitting at the kitchen table, her gaze lost in the steam rising from her cup of coffee. She looked fragile, a woman worn down by the weight of her choices and the consequences that followed. I approached her slowly, unsure of how to begin. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel the tension crackling between us. "Clara," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the pain and uncertainty we both felt. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was one of the hardest I had ever had. I poured out my heart, expressing the turmoil I had experienced since discovering her affair. I explained how my desire for revenge had consumed me, how it had led me to make choices that I now regretted. I told her that while I had wanted justice, I had only succeeded in inflicting more pain on both of us. I wanted you to feel the consequences of your actions, but in doing so, I lost sight of who I was. I admitted, my voice trembling. I became someone I didn't recognize, and I'm sorry for the hurt I've caused you. Tears filled Clara's eyes as she listened, and I could see the complexity of emotions swirling within her. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, her voice cracking. I made a terrible mistake, and I'm so sorry for the pain I caused, but I never thought it would come to this. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared pain hanging in the air. I realized that we were both victims of our choices, trapped in a cycle of hurt and betrayal. It was time to break that cycle, to face the truth together and find a way to heal. I don't know if we can fix this, Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I want to try. I want to rebuild what we had if you'll let me. The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord within me. I could feel the remnants of love still buried beneath the layers of hurt. It was fragile, but it was there, waiting for a chance to resurface. I nodded, my heart aching with the realization that while the road ahead would be difficult, it was a road worth traveling. We have a long way to go, I said, my voice steady. But I believe we can find our way back to each other. It won't be easy, but I think we owe it to ourselves too. Try. As we sat together, the sun rising higher in the sky, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to ignite a spark within me. I knew that forgiveness would be a journey, one filled with challenges and setbacks, but it was a journey I was willing to undertake. I had to let go of the anger that had consumed me, just as Clara had to confront the mistakes she had made. In that moment, I realized that revenge had not brought me the satisfaction I had sought. Instead, it had only deepened the wounds we had both inflicted on each other. The true path to healing lay in understanding, forgiveness, and the willingness to rebuild. As we began to talk openly about our feelings, the tension between us began to dissipate. We shared our fears, our regrets, and our hopes for the future. I could see Clara starting to emerge from the shadow of her despair, and I felt the weight on my own heart begin to lift. We had a long road ahead, but we were no longer standing on opposite sides of a battlefield. We were two people who had made mistakes, seeking a way to navigate the aftermath together. The love we had once shared had been tested, but I believed it could grow stronger, forged in the fires of our pain. In the end, I learned that love is not just about the good times. It's also about facing the darkness together. It's about choosing to forgive, to heal, and to move forward. As we began this new chapter, I held on to the hope that we could reclaim our love, stronger and more resilient than before. The journey would not be easy, but it was a journey I was now ready to take together. Give me a moment to think about our future, Clara, I thought as we breathed in the fresh morning air, both of us knowing that the path ahead would be filled with challenges. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of resolve. We would face it together. And in that moment of clarity, I realized that love, though tested, could endure. Thank you for following this journey with me.